The porch that wouldn't move. The story of Evelyn Blake. They thought it would be simple. A quiet call. A routine check. An old woman sitting alone. But nothing about what happened on a humid Tuesday evening in Briarstone, Georgia, was routine. Because they didn't just walk up to any porch. They walked into history, into legacy, into fire wrapped in patience. And her name was Evelyn Blake. Evelyn was 77, with skin kissed by the southern sun and silver hair pulled back into a soft twist. She didn't talk much, not unless you gave her a reason to. But her eyes, dark and sharp behind vintage wire-rimmed glasses, had seen everything: riots, marches, dreams deferred and resurrected, children born into poverty and raised into promise. She'd outlived cancer, racism, 2 husbands, and a house fire that nearly took her youngest son. And now, she sat on that creaking porch, the one her husband rebuilt after the fire, rocking slowly in a chair older than some of the houses on her block. It was her ritual. At dusk, with the sky painted in strokes of purple and rust, Evelyn brewed her tea. Always chamomile and sat with it beside her, in a chipped mug that read, "Still here. Still proud." She didn't speak unless spoken to, didn't move unless she wanted to, and she didn't care who was watching. Because after 7 decades in that same town, she'd earned the right to sit still. That evening, she wore a soft gray dress and old slippers that had molded perfectly to her feet. Across the street, a young mother named Kara Dinsmore, who'd moved into the neighborhood 3 years ago with her architect husband and gluten-free dog, pulled her son inside by the wrist when she saw Evelyn. Evelyn saw it. She always saw it. The averted eyes, the tight grips on purses, the whispered conversations at block parties when she walked by. She wasn't a mystery. She was a mirror, and some people didn't like what they saw. But Evelyn wasn't bitter. She didn't have the energy for bitterness anymore. What she had was memory. Memory in a name that mattered, especially to her son, Lieutenant Commander Marcus Blake of the Georgia State Investigations Bureau. He called every night, just to say, "Mama, you okay?" And every night, she'd reply, "Baby, I'm still sitting, still rocking, still free." Until that night. At 7:24 p.m., the call came in. "There's an elderly woman on the corner of Hawthorne and Cedar," said Kara Dinsmore, her voice just slightly elevated. "She's acting odd, just sitting there. I think she might be watching houses. She hasn't moved in hours." The dispatcher asked the standard questions. "No, she hasn't threatened anyone. No, she's not holding anything. No, she hasn't said anything. Just sitting, still, unmoving." And yet, the response was immediate. Deputies Jeff Conlon and Brian Reese were dispatched in less than 5 minutes. Young, white, and eager to make a name, they pulled up to the Blake residence with sirens off but tension high. Evelyn didn't flinch when they arrived. She simply sipped her tea. Conlon stepped out first, one hand resting near his holster. "Evening, ma'am," he called, voice loud and clipped. Evelyn didn't answer. Reese approached next, voice softer. "Ma'am, we got a call about some suspicious activity. Would you mind telling us what you're doing?" Evelyn looked up, her gaze unbothered. "I'm sitting on my porch, like I do every night." Reese shifted. "There was a report that someone matching your description was looking into windows." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "And what description is that?" Reese glanced at Conlon. No answer came. "I've lived here since 1964, she continued. "Same house, same porch, same rocking chair. If someone's got a problem with that, they can come talk to me directly." Conlon stepped forward, the porch groaning beneath his boots. "Ma'am, we're going to need to ask you a few questions down at the station." Evelyn blinked slowly. "I'm not going anywhere. You can come voluntarily," Conlon said, his voice hardening, "or we can make this official." She didn't stand, didn't raise her voice. "I'm on my porch. I haven't committed a crime. You got questions, ask him here." Conlon's jaw clenched. "This is obstruction." "No," she said calmly. "This is my home." The moment teetered. Reese shifted uncomfortably, sensing the crowd beginning to gather. A few neighbors stepped outside. One raised their phone. Conlon stepped closer. His hand brushed his belt. That's when the black SUV turned the corner. It wasn't just any vehicle, it was government issued. And when it stopped, the air changed. The door opened, and Marcus Blake stepped out. 6'4", crisp uniform, brass insignia gleaming in the fading light. He walked up the sidewalk without a word. Conlon turned, confused. "Can I help you?" he asked. Marcus didn't answer. He just held up his badge. "I'm Lieutenant Commander Marcus Blake, State Bureau. This woman," he gestured toward Evelyn, "is my mother." Silence. He stepped onto the porch, his presence swallowing the space. "You were planning to detain a 77-year-old woman for sitting on her porch?" Marcus asked. Reese opened his mouth, closed it again. "We had a call," Conlon muttered. "You had a bias," Marcus snapped. "You had a suspicion rooted in ignorance." He turned to his mother. "You okay?" Evelyn gave a soft nod. "Wasn't the first time, baby. Might not be the last. But I'm not moving for anyone." Marcus turned back to the deputies. "I want both of your badge numbers. I want your body cam footage. And I want a report filed by morning." "You're overstepping," Conlon said. "No," Marcus said, stepping closer. "You are." Reese backed off. Conlon stood frozen. "Leave," Marcus said, "before you make this worse." They left. Not a word. Just for treat. And when they did, Evelyn finally exhaled. The next morning, the footage was on every screen. A still frame of an old woman in a rocking chair. Calm, composed, unshaken. And a headline: "Deputies attempt to detain 77-year-old grandmother. Son, state officer intervenes." It went viral in under an hour. The sheriff called Marcus. Then the governor. Apologies came. Then investigations. By sunset, both deputies were suspended. But Evelyn didn't smile. Because she knew better. "This ain't new," she said. "They just recorded it this time." Over the next week, the town of Briarstone held forums. Elders spoke. Youth listened. Stories poured out. And the quiet porch on Hawthorne Street became sacred ground. People brought flowers. Apologies. Letters. One woman left banana bread with a note. "I see you now." Evelyn read them all. But she didn't move. She just rocked. Because sometimes resistance isn't loud. Sometimes it's steady. And dignity? Dignity don't flinch. It sits. It waits. It endures. And it changes everything. The days after the video were strange. Not loud, not violent, just different. For the first time in decades, people started noticing Evelyn Blake. Not out of suspicion, out of reverence, out of a need to reconcile. Children whispered her name at bus stops. Strangers nodded at her in the grocery store, unsure whether to speak or just stand in quiet acknowledgement. The very neighbors who once averted their eyes now looked too long, part curiosity, part shame, part something they didn't know how to name. But Evelyn didn't change. She still rose at dawn to tend to her rose garden, still brewed her tea by 6 p.m., still sat on her porch at sunset, rocking to the rhythm of a life well lived. But beneath that calm surface, ripples had begun. It started with a knock. A young woman barely 23, with a clipboard in hand and nervous energy in her voice. "Mrs. Blake," she said, "would you speak at our university?" "About everything." Evelyn just raised an eyebrow. "Everything," the girl fumbled. "About how you didn't move. About what that meant. What it changed." Evelyn didn't answer right away. She stared out at the yard, where the same dog that once barked at her now wagged its tail from across the street. "Let me think on it." And she did. That night, she asked Marcus, "Do I owe them my story?" Marcus shook his head. "You don't owe anyone anything. But should I give it anyway?" He smiled. "That's your choice, Mama. Just like it was your choice to stay seated." She agreed to speak once. At the university auditorium, packed shoulder to shoulder with students, faculty, reporters, and silent onlookers who had never set foot in a civil rights forum before, Evelyn walked slowly to the podium. No prepared notes. No rehearsed speech. Just her truth. "I didn't sit on that porch to make a point," she began. "I sat because it was mine. Mine to claim. Mine to keep. They say bravery is doing something loud. But sometimes it's doing nothing and letting the world reckon with its own noise." Silence felt like snowfall. No phones. No murmurs. Just reverence. She continued, "When you've lived through enough, your presence becomes protest. I'm not special. I'm not a hero. I'm a woman who refused to apologize for existing. And with that, she sat back down same as she always had. No applause. Just a standing silence. A wave of understanding. The speech went viral again. But this time, it wasn't just a clip of confrontation. It was a lesson in grace, in posture, in the power of stillness. Evelyn was invited everywhere after that. Conferences, panels, town halls. But she said no more often than yes. Not because she didn't care, but because she wanted them to care even when she wasn't in the room. I'm not here to relive trauma for applause, she told a TV producer once. I'm here to remind people to listen before they act. Marcus, meanwhile, felt the impact in a different way. Within 6 months, he was offered a federal position, Director of Civil Enforcement for the Southeastern Division. He hesitated, not because he wasn't ready, but because it meant leaving home, leaving the porch that had defined him. Evelyn saw it in his eyes before he even spoke the dilemma aloud. I didn't raise you to sit still, she told him. But I thought that was the lesson, he joked. No, baby. I sat so you could move. He took the job, not because of the title, but because of the mission. He began rewriting training programs, mandating body cam reviews, establishing empathy-based community modules, hosting roundtables where officers were required not encouraged to sit across from the very communities they policed. And in the middle of it all, he still called his mother every night. You still sitting, Mama? Still here, baby. One evening, almost a year after the porch incident, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside, a photograph of Evelyn, taken decades ago, black and white, faded at the corners. It was her, mid-March during the '68 protest down on Briar Creek. Her fist raised, her eyes blazing. The back of the photo held just 4 words, "You were always seen." She smiled quietly, and for the first time in months, she cried not from grief, but from recognition. That night, Marcus came by with his daughter Evelyn's granddaughter. At only 7, little Naomi had memorized her grandmother's story from watching clips in class. "Grandma," she said, crawling into Evelyn's lap, "my teacher says you changed everything by sitting still." Evelyn chuckled. "Not everything. Just enough. But why didn't you move?" Evelyn looked down at her granddaughter's curious face. "Because, sugar," she said gently, "when the world tries to shake you, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is not shake." Naomi blinked, then grinned. "I'm going to do that too." Evelyn leaned in and whispered, "Then you'll change everything." And maybe she would, because legacies aren't always passed through speeches. Sometimes they're passed through silence, through steady eyes, through a cup of tea and a porch that never creaks under pressure. Evelyn never moved. And so the world had to.